The night begins with two people who were never meant to stand together, yet found themselves forced into a union that carried the weight of Vatican politics. Their backgrounds were worlds apart. The groom came from a family deeply tied to church administration, respected but constantly caught between loyalty and ambition. The bride belonged to a noble line that had recently aligned with powerful European forces, making her presence inside Vatican walls unusual and politically charged. Their marriage wasn't shaped by affection but by strategy. It was an attempt to strengthen alliances, heal rivalries, and control a future that seemed to be slipping through the hands of those in power. As the couple was led into the chamber, they carried the silent awareness that their union was less about them and more about the men watching from the shadows. They understood this wasn't a celebration. It was a negotiation disguised as a ceremony. Every step they took felt monitored, every expression judged. They weren't just marrying each other. They were stepping into a stage built for political theater, and as the doors closed behind them, the atmosphere hinted that the night would unfold in ways no one expected. The chamber glowed under dim candlelight, but the mood felt cold. Dozens of influential figures lined the walls, each representing a faction with its own agenda. Some wore expressions of triumph, others barely concealed frustration. Everyone understood that this ceremony was more than a ritual, it was a test. The officiant raised his voice to begin, yet even his words carried tension, as if he knew any misstep could ignite conflict among the watchers. The couple stood stiffly, aware that every gesture would be scrutinized. Moments into the ceremony, a disagreement erupted over a single line in the vows. One group claimed the phrasing threatened tradition. Another insisted the wording was necessary for political recognition. Voices rose, hands gestured sharply, and the atmosphere shifted from sacred to confrontational. The officiant paused, pressure building around him. Instead of continuing, he was forced to restart the ceremony from the beginning. The observers didn't move or blink. They simply watched with unsettling intensity. It was clear they weren't here as witnesses. They were here as judges. The tension clung to the air in a way that made it obvious. This was indeed the last interruption the couple would face before sunrise. The first attempt at the ceremony fell apart under arguments, but the second attempt revealed deeper fractures. When the officiant tried again, a new faction challenged his authority altogether. They claimed he lacked the proper mandate, insisting that another cleric should take his place. The conflict surged so quickly that guards stepped closer, unsure whether the dispute would escalate. It became clear that the ceremony wasn't being repeated for clarity, but because rival groups were fighting for dominance. The bride and groom stood silently, caught in a storm that had nothing to do with them. The second restart only fueled more suspicion. By the time the third attempt began, the atmosphere had become heavy with unspoken threats. A powerful but late-arriving faction pushed into the chamber, demanding to witness the ritual from start to finish. They needed proof of loyalty, compliance, and unity. The room fell into a tense hush. This time, every word of the vows sounded deliberate, almost forced. Each blessing carried political meaning. Each gesture felt like a negotiation. When the third ceremony finally ended, the watchers remained stone-faced, as if unsure whether the night had secured peace or opened a deeper wound inside the Vatican. When dawn approached, the tension didn't fade. Instead, the halls filled with whispers as officials hurried between closed doors. The triple ceremony had created shockwaves larger than anyone expected. Questions rose about which faction had won, which had lost, and whether the marriage was even valid. Some claimed documents from the night had already disappeared. Clerics who played key roles were summoned for questioning. Witnesses were told not to speak. The Vatican seemed to shift into damage control mode. Reports suggest that within hours, letters were burned, records sealed, and conversations erased from official archives. Those who questioned the events were warned or quietly reassigned. But not everyone stayed silent. A few witnesses kept personal journals, writing in coded language about disputes, threats, and the pressure placed on the young couple. These fragments would later resurface, giving historians a shadowy glimpse into what the Vatican hoped to hide. In public, the Vatican insisted the wedding was simple and uneventful. But behind locked doors, leaders worried that the night exposed deeper fractures in their ranks, ones that could weaken their influence if ever revealed. The scandal wasn't just about a ceremony. It was about the secrets that ceremony uncovered. The watchers weren't random guests. They were leaders, envoys, and power brokers whose alliances shaped the direction of the church. Their presence was intentional. Each man carried authority, and each one needed assurance that the ceremony aligned with his faction's goals. Some came to confirm loyalty, others to ensure no rivals shifted the balance of influence. For them, the night was less about tradition and more about control. Their eyes followed every movement. Notes were taken discreetly. Some observers whispered among themselves, analyzing each disagreement for political advantage. A few appeared calm, as if expecting the chaos that unfolded. Others looked unsettled, realizing the unity they preached was cracking. Their reactions that night shaped the scandal's legacy. Some later wrote letters describing a divided chamber filled with silent bitterness. Others refused to discuss it, fearing retaliation. Their accounts never matched, which only deepened the mystery. What they saw wasn't simply a wedding. It was a display of power, competition, and quiet hostility among men who publicly promoted harmony. Their presence ensured that the ceremony, repeated 3 times, became unforgettable not for its symbolism, but for the conflict it exposed in the heart of the Vatican. As the first light entered the stone corridors, the couple emerged exhausted. They had spent the night as pawns in a struggle they could never influence. Servants whispered about the tension inside the chamber. Guards exchanged uneasy glances. The watchers had dispersed, but the air still carried the weight of something unresolved. The Vatican leadership quickly moved to patch the fractures the night left behind. Officials held private meetings, settling disputes and negotiating narratives to ensure no conflicting version of events leaked outside the walls. The couple was escorted away under heavy supervision, not as newlyweds, but as symbols of a fragile peace. Over the next days, the church worked hard to portray the wedding as normal, respectable, and free of conflict. Official records were polished to remove inconsistencies, but people inside the Vatican knew the truth. The night had revealed a dangerous level of division, one that leaders feared could weaken public trust if exposed. Those who witnessed the ceremony never forgot what they saw. Even decades later, personal writings described the night as unsettling and politically charged. It became a whispered legend, a reminder that even sacred spaces can become battlegrounds when power is at stake. As the story circles back to that long and silent night, you can feel how much it still lingers in the shadows of Vatican history. The marriage itself faded with time, but the circumstances around it never truly disappeared. What happened in that chamber wasn't just a ceremony repeated 3 times. It was a moment when ambition outweighed tradition, when politics stepped into a place meant for faith, and when powerful men revealed how deeply divided they were beneath the surface of unity. The witnesses who stood there left behind fragments, hints, and coded memories that refused to vanish. Their accounts remind us that history isn't shaped only by what is written in official records. It is shaped by the stories that survive despite being buried, by the conflicts that leave cracks in institutions, and by the human struggle for control that hides behind rituals meant to look pure. The Vatican moved on, but the imprint of that night stayed tucked between the lines of its past. In the end, the mystery remains unsolved. Maybe the full truth will never be known, but the echoes of that night still travel through time, reminding us that even the holiest places can hold the darkest secrets. And sometimes the most powerful events are the ones the world was never meant to see.